John, one of the last living disciples that walked with Jesus, was living in exile on an island called Patmos. One day, God gave him a vision, commanding him to write letters to 7 different churches. John also saw a series of mysterious and symbolic scenes. He saw a door open into heaven, and he was swept up into it. He saw a throne with someone sitting on it. In front of the throne, he saw a lamb, looking as if it had been killed. Lightning flashed from the throne and thunder clapped. People and creatures surrounding the throne all fell down and worshipped the lamb. And thousands of angels circled the throne and said in a loud voice, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain." Every creature in heaven and on earth gave praise to the Lamb and to the one seated on the throne. Next, John saw every person who ever lived standing in front of the throne. A book called the Book of Life opened up. Anyone whose name was not in the Book of Life was thrown into a lake of fire. But for all those whose names were there, something amazing awaited. John saw a bright and shining city descend from the sky. A loud voice told him this was where all of God's people will live and that God will live there among them forever. God will wipe away every tear and there will be no more death, crying, or pain. A river as clear as crystal flowed from the throne of God through the middle of this great city. Next to the river stood the tree of life, which healed the world from every wrong, making all things perfect. Then Jesus himself, standing with John, said, "Come, let those who are thirsty come. Let all who wish take a free gift of the water of life."
Gracious God, we ask your blessing upon our time together. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you. Amen. Today we continue with the story, chapter 31, the last chapter. We've been working through the story since the beginning of September. It's hard to believe that we have reached the end. Whenever you pick up a book and you get to the very last page where it says the end, you feel like you've accomplished something. You feel incredible that you've learned the story you were reading. It could be a life-changing book that could set you off in a new path and a new direction. For about 200 of us here at St. Andrews, we've been reading the story together. For 9 whole months, weekly, we've been dissecting and going into the scriptures and learning the story of God and seeing it unfold in chronological order, from Genesis to Revelation. I know it's been a lot of hard work, but God has blessed us as a church with these readings. We've learned about how God works, about how the stories interconnect and twine into each other. If you look to the very beginning of the book of Genesis, we see the creation story, where God created the heavens and the earth out of a formless void. And now today, at the end of the Bible, in the 21st chapter of Revelation, we see again God creating the heaven and the earth. That is a new heaven and a new earth, for the old one has passed away. This gives incredible hope for Christians to recreate something new as a time of hope and regeneration. The story of God has come full circle. We started off in a garden, in the Garden of Eden, and now in Revelation we end up again in a garden with the hope of new growth, and new life, and a new relationship with God. We've seen God's upper story be revealed to us, and we've seen His glory unfold before our very eyes. There's a program on Sunday evenings that I remember watching for years. All the time we've watched it as a family and we've all enjoyed it. And it's called Extreme Home Makeover, Home Edition. One of the first reality TV shows. You know what the program is, right? You know all about Extreme Home Makeover, Home Edition? Whenever I watch it, I'm struck with the human element, a plot that helps a family in need. The producers learn about a family because of a disaster that they have done, someone who needs help, and at the same time, it's often a family who is trying to make a difference in the world. And in comes Ty Pennington, and everyone jumps up and down and is all excited about what is going to happen. The volunteers come in and they tear down an old house and they build a brand new one. And the family doesn't have to pick out anything. They learn about a family, design the house with them in mind. There's a point in the show when reality really hits you. When the family gets to see their new home for the very first time. Now, between the family and the new house is the extreme makeover bus. And the family is on one side of the bus, and the house is on the other side of the bus, and the crowd and volunteers are chanting, and you know what they're saying together loudly? Move that bus! It's incredible to watch. And if you've never seen it, we'll see what happens. And let's watch that video now.
When I got out of the I felt love come flying at me, and I could do nothing but suck it up like a sponge.
The only other experience I had to compare it to was the day that we came back from Iraq, and everybody turned out and were just cheering us on. It seemed like it was a ceremony to honor me and my family.
I can't wait to show you what's behind this bus, because I think it really is going to give you the things back that you deserve, which is your independence and your freedom. You ready to see what's behind this bus?
Yeah. How can we set a man's for words?
You certainly can. You guys know what to say? Say it with me. Here we go. What's the motto?
I can't believe this.
Oh my God! Beautiful.
Baby God.
It's so gorgeous.
When they moved that bus and I saw a log cabin, I mean, it's just simply amazing. The situation in our house was desperate. I mean, you couldn't look anywhere without seeing something wrong. Now with the new house, it was like a weight was lifted off our shoulders. You knew everything was going to be okay. And that was going to be our saving grace. I mean, it was just like a dream come true.
If you love the house, you should probably give a big hug to John Norris and his crew from Edenton. Boys, come on in. This guy, this whole team has been incredible this week.
Well, I think that all military people are heroes. They fight to ensure our freedom. And I think by making this house accessible to him, this is going to be life-changing. And I definitely think there will be something in the future that will come from the roots of this project as far as how we can get back into the community, and especially the veterans.
Cooper family, I've been waiting to say this all week. Guys, go check out your brand new house. Go ahead.
Wasn't that great? The gentleman that was in the wheelchair was a war veteran from the Gulf War in the United States military. And he lost the ability to walk, and he was confined to a wheelchair and made it difficult to be in the home that he had, which was not much. Their son also had an accident and lost an arm because of it. He was 13. And so they had a lot of hardships. And Extreme Makeover Home Edition comes and rebuilds someone's house with their needs in mind. And one of the incredible things that I saw in that too, I don't know if you saw it or not, but the gentleman in the wheelchair actually had a special wheelchair fashioned for him that allowed him to stand up. It had a conversion thing that allowed him to get up, to stand up with his family. I've never seen anything like it. It's quite neat. But imagine if that were to happen to you. When God unveils to you for the very first time the place that you're in right now, where He's creating a new heaven and a new earth, something that you've never experienced and never seen before. I don't know that there'd be an angel shouting, "Move that cloud," but the expression would be on your face of, "Wow, isn't that amazing?" That's what a new heaven and a new earth is about in the book of Revelation. And what John, in his wisdom and in great writing, is trying to put into words the picture of what heaven would be like and what a new earth would be like. And in the new heaven and the new earth that he is talking about and giving us a snapshot of that image, is where every hassle and every heartache and every headache that you've ever had in your life gets melted away. And it's going to be worth it. Imagine being the Cooper family in Home Edition Extreme Makeover, where all the headaches and the hassles they had with their old home are a thing of the past, and they can move forward with a new understanding of life. The book of Revelation is a book of the promise of God. It's a promise that is, in the end, God wins. It may be tough now, it may be hard now, but there may be challenges, but in the end, God reigns. God reigns over us. In the end, God wins, and that's the promise that Revelation gives to us. It is the promise of God. That desire that we may have deep within us to see a new house, to see a new place that is intended for you. That is good news. Can you imagine how this promise must have encouraged the original readers and writers of God's Word? John the Apostle, the writer of Revelation, was encouraging the early Christians of the first century to give them a sense of hope. That they had been persecuted heavily. There were the 7 pillar churches of Asia Minor and the Romans trying to eradicate them, obliterating the early church and setting things square again the way they should have been in their eye. But yet, in the end, we remember that God wins. That is the promise of God, that no matter what, God wins. They knew firsthand what it was like to be persecuted in that first century. They witnessed crucifixions, beheadings, and saw loved ones put into a ring of wild animals, all because of what they believed in their faith. They always lived in that threat of persecution and needing to be on the run, needing to go off into darkness and secluding themselves within a home church because it would have been illegal to have an assembly hall like this. Even John, the writer of this book, had been exiled to an island at Patmos. And it seemed like the devil was winning the war against him. And yet, in the end, we are reminded that God wins. That is the promise of the good news in the book of Revelation. As we read out the story, it seemed like defeat and devastation had come across the people of Israel and the early church. And yet, in the book of Revelation, in chapter 1, verse 8, Jesus said, "I am the Alpha and I am the Omega, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty." High above Rome and preceding and succeeding the cruel and vicious Roman rulers, and Jesus was there. He preceded the Alpha and succeeded Omega, and he is there beginning and end. The book of Revelation gives us a sense of hope. And let's look to chapter 1, where it says in verse 12, "I turned around to see a voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. 13 among the lampstands was someone like a man." John sees Jesus standing there at the center of the lampstands. dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were blazing fire. His feet were bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and coming out of his mouth was a sharp, double-edged sword. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. Welcome to the book of Revelation. It makes you go, huh? What kind of picture is that? It is so confusing with all its images and numbers and symbols and sounds that are fast-moving and changing. It is easy to get lost in a book like this. Throughout God's story that we've been reading from Genesis all the way through, we've seen God's upper story being revealed to us. We've seen how the earth was created from a formless void in a garden, and the plants and the animals and the vegetation and Adam and Eve were created for humanity to begin. And then we saw the first sin, where they ate of the fruit of the garden of good and evil. And then we saw the destruction of Noah in the flood. And then a new world was created, a new land called Israel was created because through Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Abraham and Sarah and Joseph, and the story goes on of all the greats of the biblical narrative. Throughout all of God's story, we see God continuing trying to pull us back into a relationship again with Him. That God wants us back. That even through all the Old Testament stories, all the prophets and the kings that came and God sent them to make a difference in the people, to change their life, and to bring them back into a relationship, that's all the upper story. That God is trying to regain us, regain our faith, regain the people in the lower story throughout all the biblical narratives of the Old Testament. And then the hope comes in the New Testament with Jesus coming as a baby in a manger. And then the miracle stories that Jesus shows us how to live in the world, how to make a difference in the lives of people, how to change and transform people. And then He goes to the cross. And then He proves to us that He is beyond the grave. He is beyond death, and He can conquer death and rise up again, alive forevermore. And then that good news is carried on through the book of Paul and all the epistles that he wrote, where Paul was being martyred, and Paul continued the early church, and Paul built up all the early churches so that we could continue that mission in our world. And now we get to the book of Revelation, where we see the end times. But the end times aren't really an end time, are they? The book of Revelation gives us a snapshot of what heaven could be like. It gives us a snapshot of all of the goodness of God combined together in one place, creating a new heaven and a new earth. And what could that look like in our world? A new heaven and a new earth could be where all people live in peace and harmony. Could be a place where we no longer have suffering and death, where no one goes hungry or thirsty again, where people get along with one another and families live together in solidarity and support each other. A new heaven and a new earth is what God had envisioned all the way through the text, from the beginning of Genesis to Revelation. Revelation is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new heaven and a new earth for us to go and to follow and to be in a part of. We've seen in the story program God's upper story unfold throughout the scripture. We've seen God's lower story unfold through the historical people that lived and walked in the land. But now it's our turn. The book of Revelation is not an end of our time, but rather it's a beginning of our time to go out into the world, to live our story and tell people of our experiences with God. to be witness to the risen Christ in our life and how we've been changed and transformed in who we are. It's a time to think and say, move that bus. There is a new world out there, and we can see it. The story of Home Edition is a story of hope, that it is possible to have a new heaven and a new earth, and let the old one pass away. It's our story. The story of God, the story curriculum may have ended, but now it's a launching pad into the future and coming what's next. And I don't know exactly what's next. That's where you pick up. And that's where you determine your own decision of what you see God doing in your life and how you reflect and discern with God what comes next for you. What does a new heaven and a new earth look like in your life? Are there some things that you would like to change about yourself or your situation, or things that you might see differently? A new heaven and a new earth is with God, and what Revelation speaks to is that it's up to us to be in a relationship with God, to be in a relationship with Jesus Christ, because we are not alone. God was there before, and God will be there at the end, and God is with us all the way along. This is hope, that God is with us. We are not alone. Thanks be to God. The end.